Tales of an Unlikely Brotherhood by mentallypapaya, Chapter 5. Night, Kacchan. Love you. What? Night, nerd. Love you too. What? After the camping trip, the class just became more and more confused about the nature of Izuku and Katsuki's relationship. Uraraka, as well as most of the class, had taken the whole sleeping bag incident as confirmation that the two were dating, to the point where Asui, Kaminari, and Kirishima were the only ones still not sure. The class came to the conclusion that not only were Katsuki and Izuku dating, but that them dating had been the norm for a while. They decided, for some reason, that since the boys hadn't been in the least bit bothered by their classmates viewing them in such demanding evidence, they must have never been hiding it, and it was only the class's lack of observation skills that had led them to take so long to notice the relationship. So, out of embarrassment, the class had apparently decided to act as if they'd always known. The three non-believers had no idea how this was going to turn out, but they could agree on one thing. It was going to be entertaining, and probably slightly terrifying. The best thing about it was watching their classmates desperately try to excuse and come up with reasons for the moments where Katsuki's and Izuku's actions didn't seem very loving, like now, when Uraraka, Kaminari, and Ida had come across the delightful scene of Katsuki in the dorm halls. He was standing outside Izuku's door, a long gray scarf tied expertly and tightly from Izuku's door handle to the handle of the opposite room. Izuku, inside his room, looked to be trying to leave. However, as all the dorm doors opened inwards into the rooms, the scarf forced the door to stay shut. Izuku sounded like he was very confused about what was blocking his escape. Katsuki looked like he was having the time of his life. Kacchan, the door's stuck. Slightly muffled, Izuku sounded confused from behind the door. Katsuki bent over slightly, clutching his stomach as he made the effort to keep his laughter silent. He breathed slowly, composing himself before answering. "What do you mean?" he managed, his voice only just sounding even. Ida and Uraraka gave him twin unimpressed looks, while Kaminari stared in fascination. Katsuki, they were fairly sure, hadn't even noticed them yet. "Kacchan, I can't get out. What's wrong with the door?" Izuku's frustrated complaints were paired with the repeated rattling of the doorknob, but the scarf held tight. "Beats me," Katsuki said, wiping a tear from his eye and composing himself. "Maybe you're just not trying hard enough." "Can you use your quirk to get it open? I don't want to have to smash through." "What, you think an explosion would be less destructive? The hinges probably just need oiling or something. Try again." There was silence for a moment. The doorknob rattled around vigorously, and Katsuki collapsed against the wall, pressing a hand against his mouth as he heaved for air. "Kacchan, help me!" Izuku demanded, possibly sensing Katsuki's lack of attention through the wood. Katsuki came up for breath, just long enough to respond in a very Bakugou standard bland tone. "I am helping, what do you mean?" The doorknob rattled so hard the door started to shake, and Katsuki moved to a standing position, crossing his arms and staring at the door with a malicious grin, so wide it almost looked unnatural. He finally noticed the three students watching him, and completely unashamed, he waved. And Kaminari waved back. "Why won't the door open?" came the angry yell of Izuku. "Genuinely, Deku, I have no fucking clue." A lie. Uraraka shook her head in disappointment. There was a thump from the other side of the door, and Izuku let out a frustrated groan. "It's a mystery," Katsuki mused. "I don't understand why it would be sticking like this." "Happens to the best of us." "Kacchan!" "There's nothing I can do for you, kiddo." "Ugh!" The three watching didn't really know what to say. "Doesn't seem very romantic of him." Kaminari tested the air after they'd abandoned Izuku to Katsuki's torture. They had no idea how long Katsuki was going to keep the poor boy trapped. But, frankly, neither of the three of them had the energy to deal with it at that point in time. "Well, that doesn't—" Uraraka's mouth flapped. "Bakugou's always been an asshole. This is probably just him testing his boyfriend a little." "He did call Midoriya kiddo," Ida pointed out, begrudgingly. Well, some people have things they're into. I don't... Uraraka paused as both Kaminari and Ida had audible reactions to her statement, and she winced, thinking back through her words. Yeah, okay, I admit that was a bad one to say. I take it back. Regardless, their relationship is none of our business, and I recommend we leave it alone. Ida decided for them, and Uraraka sighed before reluctantly nodding in agreement. Kaminari rolled his eyes in amusement. Definitely entertaining. "Whose is this?" Katsuki asked, wandering into the common room and gesturing to one of the hoodies draped over the couch. There were a few strewn about, a group of the students having decided to go to the gym together on a particularly cold Saturday. They'd come back into the dorms, sweating, unanimously taking off the extra layers they had on and dropping onto the couches in fits of sweat and heavy breathing after their intense workouts. That one's Todoroki's, I think," Kirishima managed, barely looking up from where he was ragdolled in an armchair. Katsuki grunted before pointing to another hoodie crumpled up on the floor. "Into that?" "It's Mido's," Uraraka responded. Katsuki hummed, this time sounding more appeased, before confidently grabbing it and shoving it over the thin shirt he'd been wearing. Uraraka was so tired she could barely be bothered to turn around and give a suggestive eyebrow waggle to the others. "Kacchan," Izuku whined. "You can't just take my stuff without asking." "Whose tank top is that?" Katsuki asked him, pointing. Izuku glanced down at what he was wearing, which, now that they were paying attention, didn't exactly look like the kind of clothing Izuku would own. It being black with white lettering declaring, "Talk to me and I'll stab you," on it. He deflated immediately, going back to staring at the ceiling. "Yeah, okay." Katsuki snorted and walked away without another word. Another thing the class had noticed now that they were paying attention to the details of Katsuki's and Izuku's relationship was that there were a lot of moments where Izuku seemed to look to Katsuki for things, for lack of a better term. A prime example of this was when Asui had been flipping a pen around her knuckles while they were hanging out in the kitchen, and Izuku, fascinated, asked her to show him how to do it. She had agreed with a laugh, and although it took a good 20 minutes, Izuku eventually got the hang of the simpler movements enough that he could keep it up for at least 30 seconds at a time. "You're actually not bad at that," Asui mused, watching him gently flip the pen around in his hands. He beamed at her, proudly. "And here I thought you were so clumsy you could barely walk," Uraraka teased, leaning forward to rest her elbows on the kitchen counter. Izuku chuckled, before his eyes lit up and he stopped, catching the pen smoothly in his hand. I need Kacchan. Where's Kacchan?" The girls furrowed their eyebrows, sharing a glance. "Bakugou? I don't know. Why?" "Bakugou went to the store with Toto, like 20 minutes ago. He'll probably be back any second," Sero said, glancing up from where he'd been scrolling on his phone at the other end of the room. There was the noise of the door opening, and Todoroki's voice, and Sero nodded in satisfaction. "Told ya." "I do not understand. They are both white powder. Why would they not be interchangeable?" Todoroki could be heard, followed by what sounded suspiciously like a hard slap upside the head. "Salt and baking powder are nothing fucking alike, and you cannot switch them around in meals." Katsuki snapped back. Izuku's eyes brightened, and he jumped up. "Kacchan! Come here, come look!" Katsuki came into view, 2 shopping bags in his hand as he blinked over at the excited Izuku. He questioned, dumping the bags on the table as Todoroki followed him into the kitchen. "Look what I learned!" Izuku gushed, rushing up to Katsuki's side and moving the pen up to the tips of his knuckles. Slowly, he began to do as Asui had taught, and maneuvered the pen around his fingers before grinning proudly up at Katsuki. Todoroki narrowed his eyes at Izuku, and the girls exchanged another look. "Wow," Katsuki said in a bland but slightly amused tone, the kind of tone that one would use when humoring a small child. Asui squinted at him, but Izuku didn't seem to notice, instead grinning wider and nodding his head. "It only took me 20 minutes. "That's neat." Katsuki nodded his head slightly. clearly not interested, yet for some reason not completely brushing the younger boy off like everyone else expected him to. Good job. Just to top the action off, Katsuki lifted his arm up and patted Izuku on the head, before abruptly turning away and demanding everyone to get the fuck out of the kitchen, so he could unload all the groceries without them getting in the way. They skedaddled quickly, knowing how serious Katsuki got when it came to being in the kitchen, and Sarah whistled lowly as he, Uraka, and Asui reconvened in the common rooms. Just saying, that didn't seem right, coming from a boyfriend. That's what I was about to say, Asui agreed, smugly. More like a parent with a toddler. What? He was supporting his partner's learning. How is that not cute? I didn't say it wasn't cute. Asui refuted Uraka. I just said it wasn't romantic. That could be so romantic. Absolutely could not. Could too. Nope. Sarah rolled his eyes, amused and turning away from his classmates' bickering, before he landed his gaze on Todoroki, who was standing to the side and looking towards the kitchen with a slightly confused look. What? Sarah asked, as the girls' arguing faded into the background. Todoroki shrugged. You are both right. The interaction did not match up with the idea that Bakugou and Midoriya are romantically involved. It was more the sort of interaction I used to have with Fuyumi when I was younger, Todoroki said, looking like he was thinking hard. Sarah narrowed his eyes. But the other boy just shrugged once more before turning and disappearing back into his dorm room. Eyes still narrowed, Sarah turned back towards the girls, opening his mouth to speak only to realize that at some point during his conversation with Todoroki, they had apparently wandered off, leaving him completely alone. The most damning evidence, admittedly, was the first time the class saw Izuku go up to bed before Katsuki. Usually Katsuki was locked away in his room by 9 p.m. sharp. However, on this particular day, Kirishima, Kaminari, and Ashido had borderline forced him into a study session with them in the common room, leading him to still be down and about, angrily moaning about how stupid they all were, well past midnight. So, for the first time in their lives, they got to watch what was apparently normal for Izuku to do before going up to bed. All right, he said, glass of water in hand as he walked through the common rooms. I'm going to sleep. I'm half dead. See you all in the morning. He waved tiredly, and the three gave him half-hearted goodbyes, still buried in their textbooks. Izuku then looked over to Katsuki, who was in the middle of underlying and critiquing a passage Kaminari had written, albeit horribly. Night, Kacchan. Love you. 3 heads snapped up immediately. Katsuki barely even glanced over, eyes flicking towards the green-headed boy before turning back to Kaminari's work. Night. Love you too. He breathed, words coming out as casual as if he were commenting on the weather. Ashido slapped Kirishima on the shoulder, repeatedly, as Izuku finally left, looking over at him in glee as if to check that, yes, they had all witnessed the same act. Kirishima rolled his eyes, because, yeah, admittedly, that was some pretty damning evidence. A few days later, Izuku was playing a game on the common room TV with Uraka, Ida, Ashido, and Kaminari when Katsuki walked through, not even saying hi as he made his way to the kitchen. Izuku, however, perked up as if finally finding somebody he'd been looking for. Ooh, Kacchan, what's for dinner? Lasagna, Katsuki tiredly threw back, and Izuku yelled back a thanks before turning to resume their game. Uraka waggled her eyebrows suggestively. He cooks for you, huh? Come to think of it, Izuku and Katsuki didn't eat with the class much in the evenings. Katsuki would come in sometimes if he wanted to cook something that required more space than his dorm room, which was basically knitted out with its own kitchen, with the counter and the amount of appliances Katsuki had gotten in there. But Izuku usually said he already had his food sorted, so he would disappear somewhere else around dinner time. Izuku giggled, looking slightly confused. Most of the time, but only because he doesn't trust me in the kitchen. Uraka beamed at him before pausing. Most of the time? How long? Since we first moved to the dorms? Uraka nodded slowly, as if she'd found out important information but didn't quite want to let them know that she found it important. I see. Katsuki's head poked into the common room. Oi, nerd, clean your room before food's ready. Kaminari raised an eyebrow, and Izuku groaned. Can't I just finish this one game? Deku! Katsuki warned, and Izuku slumped before putting down his controller. I'll be back in a few minutes, guys, he said, giving them a smile before leaving to, presumably, clean his room. I've never had a relationship where my partner forces me to clean my room, Ashido said, a small crease in her forehead. Well, you've never had a relationship point blank, Kaminari pointed out, to Ashido's offended squawk. It does seem a bit controlling, Uraraka said, hesitantly. But Bakugou's a bit of a clean freak. Maybe it's just their thing. We shouldn't judge. She's right, Ida nodded, though he looked a tad bit unsure of himself. Slowly, the four turned back to their game. After a training session, Aizawa swept his eyes over the tired, sweaty students in front of him. Does anyone need to go to Recovery Girl? He asked, voice dead. Slowly, everybody shook their heads, somehow managing to come out of their recent exercise without much more than a few bruises. Truly a miracle for Class 1A. Izuku, however, sniffled, before dragging his feet over to where Katsuki was standing, stretching out his arms. Kacchan, my leg hurts. Kirishima narrowed his eyes dramatically. Aizawa-sensei just asked if anyone needed healing, and he goes to Bakugou because he's hurt? He muttered. This is fascinating, Kaminari agreed, nodding. This is romantic, Ashido butted in quietly, and upon hearing her friend's scorn, she scoffed. They literally said they loved each other. You cannot doubt me anymore. Kirishima and Kaminari made twin skeptic faces, and Kaminari was the one to joke. We can as long as we blame it on homophobia. Kirishima, bisexual, snorted into his palm, and Ashido smacked Kaminari exasperatedly. Yeah, fuck the gays, Kirishima tacked on with a grin, just to annoy her. They were brought out of their conversation by Izuku's sudden yelp, and they turned to see him balancing precariously on one leg, the other having been wrenched high into the air for Katsuki to inspect. Bakugou, if his leg is hurt, you shouldn't pull on it like that, Aizawa reprimanded, and Katsuki ignored him to poke at parts of Izuku's skin, talking in the most dry, toneless voice the class had ever heard. It even managed to beat out Aizawa. Oh my god, how are you still alive? It's a miracle, he drawled, as Izuku's face dropped into one of irritation. You have a bruise the size of a grape on your knee. This is truly a travesty. You'll probably have to go into emergency surgery. How have you suffered in silence for so long? Izuku wrestled his leg away and stood up properly again. You don't have to be so mean. I said it hurt, not that it was broken or anything. He crossed his arms and pouted. Katsuki rolled his eyes. You're fucking pathetic. So, you're okay? Uraraka checked on her friend. Yeah, Izuku muttered gloomily, sounding slightly put out, and Katsuki snorted. You just want my attention. Shut up. Izuku whined, chasing after the blonde as he left for the changing rooms. The issue was, although there was a fair amount of sweet, romantic-seeming moments between Katsuki and Izuku, they were still Katsuki and Izuku. The only difference was that now the class got much more concerned for Izuku every time Katsuki shoved him away, or insulted him, or got into a physical fight, and they fought a lot. And it usually didn't take long for the ridiculous spats to turn violent, ending in Izuku being shoved off his seat or pinned to the floor under Katsuki. It came to a head one evening when, while relaxing in the common room, Izuku got bored and began innocently to poke Katsuki's shoulder. The others barely took notice, and Katsuki didn't respond to the poking, leading Izuku to get more invested in the action. He sat up and grinned, poking more vigorously until Katsuki finally snapped and grabbed the offending finger, beginning to slowly fold it backwards. Ow! Oh my god, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it! Izuku rushed out, yelping as the force of Katsuki was applying started to hurt. Oh, didn't you? Katsuki challenged, bending the digit back even further until Izuku was lying down on the couch in pain, before smirking and finally letting go. "Don't fucking touch me, asshole," he declared, turning back to his phone. Izuku laid, holding his finger morosely, before slowly wincing, even before he'd even completed the action, inching his toe over to poke at Katsuki's shoulder. There was a high-pitched screech as Katsuki shoved Izuku into the floor, before effortlessly kicking out his legs to slam him into the side of the coffee table, harshly. The rest of the group watched, still intense, as Izuku whimpered on the floor, complaining about the pain and suffering Katsuki had caused him. "Bakugou, that was really harsh," Uraraka said, face creased in worry. Todoroki was the only one who seemed unbothered by the level of violence between the two, nodding his head in almost recognition before turning back to his book. "Yeah, I don't think Mido deserves that," Ashido added quickly, while Izuku continued to writhe around on the ground, clutching his finger and bemoaning quietly. "He's fucking fine," Katsuki scolded, before reaching out to nudge the boy with his foot again. "Get the fuck up, you dramatic ass. You asked for that." To the group's surprise, Izuku did just that, muttering spitefully about his finger, but calming down and settling back in his seat. The others didn't really know what to do, sharing unsure glances at each other, while Katsuki and Izuku went back to silently scrolling on their phones. It stayed that way until Katsuki went up to bed, when Izuku turned to mutter another, "Night, love you," and Katsuki responded in kind before leaving, baffling the class even further. "Mido," Uraraka decided to speak up cautiously. "Are you and Bakugou okay?" Izuku looked confused. Yeah, why?" "Yeah, but, are you okay with him?" Uraraka pressed. Izuku squinted slightly before his eyes widened. "Oh, you mean just then? Yeah, that's fine. He's done way worse in the past." He laughed off, and Uraraka panned another concerned look around the group. "Midoriya." Ida was the one to finally bite the bullet and say it. "Romantic partners are not supposed to hurt each other." Kirishima, Kaminari, Asui, and more recently joining their skeptic group, Sero, all exchanged looks, biting their bottom lips in anticipation. Izuku froze, an uncomprehending look in his eye. He took a few seconds to process the words before a lip quirked up slightly in amusement. He let his mouth fall open slightly. "Sorry, what now?" Ida opened his mouth, hesitant at Izuku's clear-humored state. He didn't get the chance to say anything, however. Nobody did. This was because Izuku, the second Ida opened his mouth, burst into the loudest and biggest set of cackles the group had ever heard. They watched him flail about on the couch, clutching at his chest and desperately trying to breathe as tears rolled down his face, before Uraraka turned to them, cheeks slightly red. "Do you think we got it wrong?" Kirishima and Kaminari gave her pointed looks, eyes widened arrogantly. "You fucking might have," Kirishima said sarcastically, feeling justice course through him. He and Asui reached over to blindly high-five each other. Izuku fell off the couch, half choking and half wheezing. "Let's just hope he doesn't tell Bakugou." Author's notes. Deku will indeed tell Bakugou. Bakugou will laugh harder than Deku, and the class will never fucking live it down.